All right.
Okay.
Recording.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sharon Sabota. I'm the director of the Center for Women and Gender Equity, and I also serve on the CCIE subcommittee on Gender Equity and Women's History Month. And this year we put out an open call for proposals for people to contribute content toward our programming. And we were really excited when Professor Claire Williams came forward with the proposal for this event, looking at the role of women in sports. And so on that note, I'm going to hand it over to her to introduce our panelists and get the event started.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sharon. Hi, everybody. I am Professor Claire Williams, faculty member in kinesiology, but also affiliate of Women in Gender Studies. Thank you so much for coming to our panel today titled Title IX Turns 50, Who's Running Women's Sports? So I want to thank some of our sponsors. So the Center for Women's and Gender Equity, Department of Kinesiology, Women in Gender Studies, as well as the CCI subcommittee, as Sharon mentioned. I want to thank in particular our panelist, Cami Gray, who will be leaving at 5, but she'll be a strong participant until then. Piper Brewster, Sherry Otto, Stephanie Shreve-Hawkins, and Teresa Romanello. They will introduce themselves in more depth in a little bit, but I have asked them each to participate because they are currently or in the past working as administrators or coaches in intercollegiate and interscholastic athletics, and because they have an affiliation with St. Mary's, either currently working at St. Mary's or previously working at St. Mary's, and or having earned at least 1 or more degrees from St. Mary's. So I'm really delighted to have you all in community today. So before we go any further, I am hoping to take advantage of Zoom for what it has to offer. And if you all could put in the chat your affiliation to athletics, whether it's as a coach, a student athlete, an administrator, current or past, and maybe your sport as well, just so we can get a sense of who's in the room. So again, using the chat, what's your affiliation to sport? And it could be multiple roles. Thanks for getting us started, Steph. All right, we have water polo. Jen, I'm just going to add soccer in there for you too. A yoga teacher, men's rugby. Great. And Tacey's our women's basketball player. Great, some more soccer. Student athlete, alum, current administrator, softball, basketball, volleyball. Great. Okay, athletic trainer, love it. Faculty, swim instructor. All right. Okay, thank you so much. Throughout the Zoom session, I'm going to ask folks to keep themselves muted. I would love to have cameras on if you're comfortable, just to make this help us be in community as much as possible, and to use the chat feature. So in a moment, I'm going to give us a little bit of a context of Title IX, but then I'll really pass it over to our panelists. I've prepared some questions for them. We'll have time for questions and answers at the end, but if there are questions that come out throughout the session, please feel free to use the chat. I feel like that's not that there are many benefits of Zoom, but that is one of them. As questions arise, feel free to pop them in. So some of us are more familiar with Title IX than others, probably is an understatement, but just so that we are all on the same page, Title IX passed in 1972 and was a law that was passed to eliminate discrimination on the basis of sex in educational institutions that receive federal financial assistance. It was passed not in relation to athletics to start. It was passed in order to alleviate caps, for example, on women being admitted to graduate education and discrimination that women faculty were facing. In the past 50 years, though, the law has been increasingly interpreted and applied differently, all related, though, to sex-based discrimination in education institutions. So as soon as the law was passed, there was an immediate application to varsity athletics, club athletics, intramural athletics, physical education, and then in more recent decades, there's an application to pregnancy-based discrimination. As we probably well know, an application to harassment and sexual violence. And then probably most recently is a debate around its impact and what it provides for trans athletes. So for the purpose of today, we're going to focus on athletics, unless maybe a question takes us in a different direction. From the participation perspective, something that Title IX did for us was that increased women's participation in sports by leaps and bounds, right? Women started participating in sports. I think that the stat is that the percentage of girls participating in high school sports is 100% greater than it is today than it was in 1972. So it's 100% at the high school level, right? That's amazing. And it's about 600% at the college level. Those numbers, though, just to make sure we're clear, are still lower than the number of boys and men who are participating in sports. On the athletic administration side, which is where we'll focus for today, before Title IX, about 90% of women's athletic programs were administered by women and 90% of women's teams were coached by women. Primarily that was because institutions had separate athletic departments. Once Title IX passed, one of its kind of prevailing understandings was that the athletic departments should merge. And when the women's athletic departments merged with men's athletic departments, the men very much retained the positions and women did not. So that's how we get to some of the stats that hopefully brought you in today, knowing that those numbers of women who are administering sports are much, much lower than they were pre-Title IX, and the number of women coaching women is much, much lower than it was pre-Title IX. So on the one hand, we have an amazing positive impact on women's athletic participation, and we have an imperfect law, which has led some other consequences. This is all to say it's an imperfect law, and hopefully what we'll be able to talk about today are some of the positives and some of the maybe the drawbacks or areas for improvement or needs for different types of legislation or something along these lines. So that is, I think, all I have, hopefully short and sweet, to the point. I'm going to now turn it over to our panelists. I'm going to have each of you introduce yourself, giving us a little bit of context of who you are, your affiliation with St. Mary's, and let me make sure I have everything, and your path to working in athletic administration. So Sherry, maybe I'll start with you actually. Would you mind getting us started? And then we'll go to Carrie, Piper, Steph, and Teresa.
Okay, sure. My name is Sherry Otto. I spent quite a bit of time at St. Mary's. I started at St. Mary's in 1978, and I was hired as coordinator of women's athletics, a faculty member of the kinesiology department, and the women's tennis coach. And so until 2011, I continued at St. Mary's full time. And during that time, not that whole time, I was the coordinator of women's athletics and served as the kines department chair and taught in both the undergraduate and graduate kines programs. My route to athletics was, I knew that I wanted to teach physical education, and I went to Valparaiso University in Indiana, got my teaching credential there, and actually started teaching physical education. And at that time, that was in 1968. At that time, athletics for girls basically came down to things like play days and getting together with other schools and things like that. There really was not a whole lot of competition. There was Girls Athletic Association, where we would get together and, like I said, do various kinds of athletics and sports, but there wasn't a whole lot of competition at that time. In college, we were starting to see more and more competition. I played field hockey and basketball in college, but it certainly wasn't, it was very limited, very limited.
Thanks, Sherry. I'm Cammie Gray. I'm the Deputy AD for Internal Operations at St. Mary's, currently in the Senior Women's Administrator. I've been at St. Mary's since 2000. when I came in, and I was part of the softball team when I first came in, and got recruited here to come and participate on the softball team. So I started out, got my undergraduate degree here in liberal and civic studies, an undergraduate and a minor in kinesiology. I also got my teaching credential as well, and a master's in education and instruction. Originally, I was looking into possibly going into teaching, and I knew I wanted to teach in some field and working with students, and just being able to have that interaction in developing and working with individuals, which is the part that I really enjoy. I had an opportunity. Well, as an undergraduate, I also started out as a student in doing various jobs within the athletic department, between summer camps and working tickets at events, and also working with the person at the time who was in the business operations, and getting my foot kind of in the door at that time. When I finished school, there was an opportunity that opened. I started out in compliance, and then kind of went into business and finances, and then became the senior women's administrator, and kind of went into various areas just throughout my time here at St. Mary's. So currently I oversee a lot of our internal operations, working with compliance and student services, overseeing the finances, equipment and travel, our sports performance, the training room in sports medicine, and then also overseeing a number of our sports supervisor for a number of our programs here as well.
Thanks, Cami. Hi, everyone. My name is Piper Brewster, and I'm currently the athletic director at Carondelet High School in Concord. My path in athletics, though, took me through St. Mary's. So when I grew up, I played sports when I was younger, but then I was always on the short side. And so I didn't keep playing, but I always kind of was in the background in sports. So I worked a lot of tournaments, did stats for teams. So I travel with them. And then I did cheerleading and dance. And when I got to St. Mary's, I found out that you could major in sports. There was kinesiology as a major. And so I was a sports management major. And then I worked in the external relations office here at St. Mary's. So I did a lot of stats at the games. Back then we made media guides. We didn't do social media back then though. So I did a lot of that stuff. I did marketing for the Raiders as an internship. And as I got towards kind of the end of my undergraduate degree at St. Mary's, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so I went to law school, which is not the thing to do when you don't know what you want to do. But I thought I'd find a path in law. But while I was in law school, I actually took sports law as an elective. And so it kind of brought me back to sports. And I worked at the professional level then for the Oakland Raiders. They were in Alameda at the time. And so I worked for their general counsel for a year. And that was really exciting. But, you know, when you're working in professional sports, it's a business, essentially. You're not getting that kind of, you know, relationship with the athletes where you really feel like you're, you know, part of the team and you're giving back and you're kind of gaining on that personal level. And so I wanted to get back to that. And so my sports law teacher in law school was like, you know, have you heard of compliance at the college level? You know, that would be kind of law adjacent. And so that's when I reached out to Stephanie, who's on the call, and she had me come in as an intern, and I stayed for 11 years, not as an intern. They finally hired me. But so I then stayed at St. Mary's for 11 years, predominantly in compliance. I also oversaw women's rowing and men's and women's cross country and track. And so I got to work with all different aspects of the sport, trying to make it essentially a better experience for the athletes, which is really what I was looking for. And so almost a year ago, so last summer, I took the opportunity to go over to Carondelet as the athletic director. And so I really like where I'm at now, because, you know, I get kind of to balance that. I get to oversee the department, choose what we're going to do with the budget, and essentially try to make it a better experience for all the athletes there every day. And we're an all girls school. And so that'll kind of be tied into some of my answers to the questions later, where I'm not balancing, you know, boys and girls sports, but I think it's still a huge thing to work towards the recognition of girls and women's sports, even after Title IX.
Is it me?
Yeah, I think it's you.
Yeah,
Steph.
okay. Thanks, Piper. I'm next on the
Your little
docket.
intro.
Yeah, I love it. I'm Stephanie Shreve Hawkins, and right now I am the athletic director at San Francisco State. And my path, wow. I'll try not to age myself too much by talking too long, but I was a student athlete. So I went to Berkeley High. I grew up in the area, and then I went to Cal State Fullerton on an athletic scholarship. So that's the love part of the relationship for me in Title IX. So I did receive a scholarship and an opportunity to go there. And then I came back to the Bay Area, and actually my degree is in child development. So I was a teacher and a coach for a while, both in Richmond and in Oakland, in the primary grades, as well as being a head coach at Contra Costa College. So that was sort of my foot into the collegiate scene. Then I was an assistant coach at Cal for a year and a half, and then went straight into administration there as a fundraiser, as director of development. And at the same time, I was getting my master's degree. So I applied here to St. Mary's College and got my master's in what was then health, PE, and recreation, and now has the fancy word of kinesiology. So that was my master's. And right when I was finishing and was actually taking my compositions, is that what you call them, right? The exams. I applied for the senior women administrator and associate AD job here at St. Mary's. So I got the job. I don't know if I was first or second or third choice, but it didn't matter. That, and I'll talk about that later, how that just doesn't matter. Take the job. And I had a great experience here because they were just sort of building their compliance program. And that was on me to do that. So I did that, was here for 4 years. Then I went down to UC Irvine in the same capacity as associate AD and senior woman administrator. And then I started a family, or I was going to. So I quickly said, what am I doing down here in Southern California? I got to get back home. So I came back up to the Bay Area, and Mark Orr at the time, who was the athletic director, said, well, hey, I got a job. Remember the job you were in? And it was at a different sort of role as assistant AD and just in compliance. But I took that job and was able to balance my life as a mother, as a single mother, and as a sport administrator. Athletics is my passion. And then I was here for, gosh, whatever -4 years from now was. So, and I applied a few times to some positions to be an athletic director. At the time, I wasn't really sure that that's what I wanted to do, because the balancing of work and life and family and all of that is difficult. But I applied to San Francisco State and got the job. So there I am. And yeah, I'm a graduate from here, and I worked here for 15 years. Right now, I'm in a doctoral program at Cal State East Bay in educational leadership for social justice. So my topic, in fact, is the underrepresentation and disproportionality of female leadership, in particular, women of color in leadership positions in athletics. So I have a lot to say about this topic, and I'll try to be short about it when those questions come up. So thank you, and thanks for everyone being here.
Is that me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm Teresa Romanello. I am the head women's soccer coach here at St. Mary's. I was reflecting as I was listening to everyone else speak that I've actually been coaching now for 18 years, which sneaks up on you. I was a student athlete at the University of Washington. I'm originally from Seattle and was majoring in business and really didn't know what path I was going to take at that time when the 1999 women won the World Cup. And the dominoes started to fall, and they started the first ever women's professional league in my senior year. And so I was fortunate to actually be drafted in the first professional league as a senior. And I still remember my coach texted me and said, hey, you're drafted. And I was like, wait, really? What? This is a real league? This is actually happening? And so I left my spring of my senior year to go play in the inaugural league. And we won the first championship.
And I ended up coming back to finish in the fall in the off season for playing professionally. And so I had an incredible opportunity to play with, some of the greatest players in the world. Mia Hamm, Brandy Chastain, was on the San Jose team, which was the team that I was drafted to. And, soccer basically became my life at that point. In the second season, I injured my back. I herniated a disc, which really put me out for a whole year. And at that point, I started to think, maybe I should start thinking about a career long-term. I'm not gonna be able to play forever. And I would say at that point, I really fell into coaching. I started, basically applying to any assistant coach job that I saw posted on the NCAA board. I started reaching out to some networks, asking about different head coaches, looking for good mentors. And so my first job took me to the University of San Diego. And I was there for 5 years. And after that, I went to Stanford for 3 years. Had another, tremendous experience being an assistant coach. And after being an assistant for about 8 years, I was really, frankly, I was bored. I felt like I was ready for the pressure of making my own decisions and leading my own program. And at that point, I was really looking for a school that I felt had something that would set it apart from everybody else. And I wasn't sure what that looked like until the job opened at Dartmouth. And so I went for the job, and I got the head coaching job at Dartmouth, where I spent 3 seasons. And the Ivy League was just a whole nother kind of cup of tea compared to what I had experienced being from the West Coast. And after 3 years there, I went to the University of Notre Dame in Indiana. So I was really taking, a total trip around the United States, figuring out where I wanted to live, what the best places were. I got to experience a lot of different conferences and ways that people go about business, which was fantastic. And then at that point, actually, I got out of coaching for 2 years. So I was 4 years into my contract, and I had 2 young kids. And at that point, I decided to step away for a couple of years, which I soon realized was very difficult for someone who's been coaching their whole life in the youth system, college system, and lived the life of being a player. And so St. Mary's opened, and I jumped all over it because it's in a tremendous conference, great location, and for me, had absolutely everything to offer a recruit. And what I thought could be a place where you could build a top 50 program. So long story, that's how I got back to the West Coast, back in California. I'm currently doing my master's program here at St. Mary's right now. I've started about 3 times in my life and always had to leave for another job. So I'm excited about actually finishing one here at St. Mary's.
Thank you so much. And Teresa, I'll add you started in January 2020, right at St. Mary's or something outstanding like that. Good timing. Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate all those different kind of entryways and already starting to give us some glimpses into what it looks like as an athletic administrator. So my next question for you all really focuses on the participation piece before we pivot back to the administration. So from your perspective, what have been the biggest changes in women's intercollegiate and or interscholastic athletic participation since the passage of Title IX and or in the past 10 to 15 years, right? 50 years is a lot to reflect on. I've already shared that tons more women are participating, but from your perspective, what have been the biggest changes in relation to participation? And maybe I'll offer the same order as we had before, but if you want to pass on an answer, that's totally fine too. So Sherry?
I think I should start.
Sure, yes. Thank you.
Oldest here. So I mentioned that I came to St. Mary's in 1978. St. Mary's had just joined the AIAW that year. Before that, they were just competing as like an independent without being in any national affiliation. We had 3 teams when I came for women. And there were 2 teams. There was volleyball and there was tennis that were actually coached by professionals. The 3rd team was basketball, and it had been started the year before by a group of students, and it was being coached by male students. And so that's where we were at with the participation level in 1978. And so you can kind of see historically how much we have grown. I mean, while I was there, it was just growing by leaps and bounds. An interesting point of how we grew the programs initially were that it was student-based. So if students would come to me and say, we really would like to have a soccer program, we really would like to have a softball program. The way that the system worked was they would try to get enough women together to play on that team, and we would see how it would go, and before we would make any major financial commitments. And that's how basically all of the teams got started, really, was from student interest saying, this is what we would like to do, and we would like to go from there. Scholarships had just started the year before I came, and we had 3 tuition waivers in 1978 for all of the teams. That was it. So that's kind of a historical perspective. And yes, I mean, I just see, you know, the participation at both the high school level and the college level. I mean, it's just astronomical, just amazing. And it's acceptable. The other thing to kind of have in mind is that when it all first started, it was viewed kind of like, well, okay, some sports would be okay, but not all the sports, and primarily the non-contact sports. So you notice volleyball and tennis were the ones that were the first ones instituted. And at that time, they were both coached by women. We had a female volleyball coach, and I was coaching the tennis team. And I was the administrator of that huge athletic program at that time. So yeah, major growth.
I would agree that it's been great to see the number, and just to look at the statistics of the number of girls participating and the expanding the opportunities that for girls and women in sport. And hopefully that's a trend that we just keep seeing go up and up and up, as well as the scholarship opportunity and just the opportunities. It's been right now such a fun time of year. I know there were the games taking place with March Madness, and to see many of these women's tournaments that are being sold out, and just the crowds and the atmosphere that are taking place right now, it's such a great opportunity, and great for other athletes and younger athletes to see those taking place too, with some of the growth in the women's sports. I think one of the other big changes right now is just more opportunities to turn sport into a career, and collegiate and professional opportunities. That there's those professional opportunities that I never really saw those as much when I was younger, looking at maybe there was the goal of playing in the Olympics, or maybe there was some of the things that girls had when they were younger. But now to see many of the professional sports that are taking place with the WNBA and over opportunities overseas, and the professional soccer leagues, and just more opportunities are taking place and making those professional opportunities, it is really tremendous to see those opportunities that are developing more and more.
I'll say too, just coming from the high school level, so I work with younger women. It's just amazing to see how they're not just falling in line and accepting the status quo anymore, that they're really looking to advocate for women's sports going forward and the equality, where I think for a long time, people were happy they had Title IX, and, you know, that it had made some changes, and, you know, the rest was just kind of, that's the way it's going to be. And I think, you know, women nowadays, they have a lot of strong leaders, and they're able to kind of, you know, break the silence and not be afraid to voice their concerns, which is kind of what happened last year with the women's NCAA tournament, that student athletes were the ones that, you know, voiced their concerns with the inequality, and they were looking to make change, and they weren't going to accept anything less than that. And getting to see such young women advocating for equality in women's sports at the high school level is really amazing.
And I would add, I agree with all of that that everyone has said. The one thing that I've noticed in the past 50 years is the level of play for females has increased, I think, astronomically, like even more so than it has on the men's side. And I just, that's an, you know, that it's attributed to the participation level. I think the opportunity being there. And I'm sure Coach Teresa would agree, like you just have more of a pool to recruit from and a higher level of play. So I think girls and women participating are really showing that the ability is there. You just, the opportunity needed to be provided to get to a higher level. So I have noticed that for sure. And again, you know, I would echo on the scholarships and the participation. And the club sports are going off the, I mean, it's crazy. I think when I played club volleyball, there were like 3 clubs in the area, and now they're just everywhere. I think that's the same for soccer and other places. So again, it's attributed to the participation.
I was gonna add in regards to the youth teams, because I work with one of the local soccer clubs, is not only are you seeing 1 team per club, you're seeing potentially 3 teams at an age group, which reflects how much desire there is for these young women to get involved. And then the next conversation is becoming, okay, how do we get rid of the financial barriers, you know, to get more people even involved? Because there's still more women out there who want to join, but they can't often get a scholarship from a club. But I think we're seeing, you know, more parents invest in, you know, not just sending their boys, but sending their girls and getting them involved in sports at a young age, because they're seeing all the positive values that are taught through sport. So yeah, and I think, I mean, I think when Piper touched on, you know, the NCAA program, you know, it reminded me again of even when I started out coaching, you know, as a staff, I almost felt like we needed to partner with the men's program when we asked for something. You know, if we wanted improved facilities, or we wanted, you know, to have a better locker room, or to build something, like we didn't feel necessarily comfortable as a women's program going in on our own with that ask, because we didn't feel like it would be met positively. And so if we could align ourselves with a successful men's program, we probably had a better chance. So I definitely think there's a little bit of a turn there when you start to look at the facilities around the country. When you look at the SEC, ACC, you know, some of those schools don't have a men's program, and they are investing in the women's side.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, so my next question is going to be related to experience. So some of you have sort of already woven this into your introductions, but specifically, given the decrease in women administering and coaching women's athletics since the passage of Title IX, what particular challenges or opportunities have you experienced working as a woman in athletic administration or coaching, or what challenges, opportunities exist for women in general in these positions? And we'll start with this. We'll just keep going the same order. I like it.
Okay. All right. So again, so I mentioned AIAW. So that was the Women's National Affiliation. I can't remember when it went away, but it went away because they decided that they could not financially support women's programs as well as the NC2A could. I have various feelings about all of that. They, you know, the women that were the leaders of that AIAW decided at the time that it would be best if they joined with the NC2A. And so this goes to what you said earlier, Claire, about because of that whole thing, the men's programs saw this as an opportunity to pretty much control the women's programs, and that's what happened. Now at St. Mary's, one of the interesting things that happened was that for a while, the NC2A allowed the men's programs to have a dual affiliation with NAIA. And so our women's program opted to join with the NAIA, which philosophically was a very good fit for St. Mary's. And athletically, we were extremely successful at the national level. We won 3 national championships, volleyball, soccer, and so on. And so at any rate, then the NC2A decided that if you wanted to compete in the men's NC2A program, you could not be dual membership. And at that point, that was when St. Mary's opted to go the full NC2A. And that really was when there was a loss of autonomy for the women's program. And the women's program really came under one head athletic director at that point is pretty much what happened. I did want to mention about the soccer program. At the time that they won the national championship, there were very few programs putting money into the soccer programs. And the head coach, Randy, at the time, I said to him, you know, I think we could build a national program here, a really successful national program, if we put the next group of scholarships that we get into the soccer program. And that's what was proposed, but that did not happen. Pretty much St. Mary's wanted to follow the tradition of the men's program of highlighting basketball. And that was pretty much the way that it went. So yeah, it's was my experience in terms of seeing the change in the administration. And the other thing in terms of the coaches, what it seemed to me like was that the men who wanted to coach and were not getting head positions saw the opportunity that, well, now we've got all of these women's teams, so now I've got more opportunity to get a head coaching position. And so we saw a lot of men applying for those coaching positions. And unless you were really very dogmatic about it, they tended to come with more experience, more coaching experience than the women who applied for the jobs. And so one of the interesting things to me has been that because we've seen this tremendous increase in participation, and there have been so many women now who have gone through good programs, good coaching, and we still aren't getting those women into the coaching ranks. It's amazing to me.
Kind of expanding off that, I think just, yeah, Title IX has helped in expanding the opportunities for women and girls in sports, but I think however we can help in supporting women in these administrative roles and these coaching roles is also a huge opportunity in how they can be supported throughout that. There's different organizations and opportunity, and looking at some of the women's leaders programs out there, and just opportunity amongst our staffs, professional development opportunities. How can we help and support within maybe even that work-life and balance, whether it's opportunities in traveling with young ones as you look at transitioning into these career paths, and in whichever directions that we might want to do that. I know for a long time in my life, it's very different than what it is right now that I have a young one, and as I transition into being a mother in those regards. But I think it's important for those that we work with to see those and to see that it can be done. and that you can get the support in those resources. I think whether it's being able to, when you're traveling, and opportunities to bring those ones with you, or how can we work with it and be flexible and to show the support. And I think that can be a challenge, as maybe some females might be looking at going into the different career paths, but it's important to see these examples and see it can be done, and see that we have the support and resources as we have these leaders that look into going into these opportunities, and to see that we can have many women who can be successful in both the administrative roles and also in the coaching opportunities.
Thanks, Cami. So when Claire sent out these questions, and, you know, it talked about what was one of the biggest challenges that you've seen as a female administrator in athletics, and I had to kind of think about it. And I think actually it's something that I never really thought of as a challenge until I was talking to one of my friends that works in law, which is another area where there's predominantly a lot of men at the upper level. And she was talking about being in court one day, and everyone else in the room was a man, the judge, the opposing counsel, the bailiff, and that was really intimidating to her. And you know, I kind of was like, you can't be intimidated by that in athletics, or I'm the only female in the room a lot of the time, to be honest. And you just, you know, I never really thought of that as a challenge, but I know for some women that can be intimidating, that you're at a table with all men and you're having to express your ideas and your opinions and stand up for things that are important to you. And you can't, you know, shy away from that you need to know that your voice and your ideas are equal to theirs when you're in those positions. And, you know, that's just going to come up a lot of the time. You know, Stephanie is paving the way being a female athletic director. But even when you're in that seat, you know, I'm a high school female athletic director, but 80% of the conference that I play in, they're led by a male athletic director. There's only 2 females. So when we're in meetings, it's me and one other person. And I think both of her and I, we both do a really good job of, you know, voicing our opinions and what's important to us and what's important to female sports within our conference. And a lot of times I'll talk to my staff about that. You know, females, we do have really strong traits that make us perfect for these jobs in sports, that, you know, we're great communicators. That's super important. We have strong attention to detail. So, you know, utilize your strengths and don't let yourself get intimidated when you are the only female in the room. That's not necessarily a challenge, because you provide a lot of traits that are going to be helpful in that room and in that group.
Thanks, Piper. Yeah, I have a lot to say. I'll try to be short with this, but I think that what all of you have said so far, this perception, I think too, that women are being given opportunities that they're not earned. The development of the senior woman administrator position, right, sort of makes this glass ceiling in athletics. So when they merged the women's association with the men's, they said, oh, well, let's create the senior woman administrator position, which is great, because I was in that position, Cammie's in that position, but only one can be in that position. So then what does it do? It just provides this this practice of just hiring a woman as a quota, and then having this glass ceiling that's there. And then what else? I wrote so much about this. That the perception that women are being given opportunities, but again, you know, as we've heard here, that they've actually been decreased. And then men continue to be passed around in these positions. I've seen many in coaching and administrative positions, and they just leapfrog from one place to the next, and they constantly are getting the job, the same men, the same people. And then we also see where, you know, people will say, well, you know, she doesn't have the experience. And Sherry, you know, Dr. Otto, you brought this up too, about the experience was less for the women than the men, but where was the opportunity historically to create that experience? And so we've seen many men who are hired who have less experience, and we don't ever say anything about it. So I think we need to get out there and find as many women as we can. And I would just say we need to hire women. And I've tried to do my best in my career to do that. And so we're really just we're in a masculine culture still and have been forever in athletics. And so to break that, and Piper was talking about the traits that are seen as more feminine and that women have are actually great traits for where we're going in our culture to be better providers for cultures of belonging for everyone. And so we have those innate traits, and I think we need to sell those at a higher level and be confident about that. The challenge about being a woman in society in general, it just is, you know, athletics is a microcosm of that. And I think what I've experienced is having to sort of turn on and off the feminism in different rooms and having to sort of learn where you're accepted, where you're not, and how to play that game. And we shouldn't have to do that. We're being asked, I don't know if any, Piper, you've been asked this yet, I'm sure Cami has, and many of you, Sherry did, when you say that you're an athletic director, oh, you oversee the men's program too? men never get asked that question. And then, you know, a couple of you have touched on the work-life balance. You know, outwardly people saying that they admire that you're balancing everything so well. But when it comes down to it, you're also judged for that as well. And so we've got to sort of break that pattern too. So many things. And I'll let Coach talk now.
Oh, you're doing great. I guess women should be coaching women's sports is my opinion. You know, we pretty much, you know, can't apply for a men's job. You know, I've thought about it just for kicks to see what would happen if I applied for a men's job, to see if I would even get an interview. But I think, you know, for me, some of the challenges are, you know, even, you know, coming up 24, 25, being an assistant coach, being predominantly around older men is intimidating. And, you know, having to navigate calling a club coach to talk about a recruit, it's intimidating. You know, you feel that there's this men's network out there. And I think as a woman, you have to be really intentional about creating a network around yourself with, you know, older mentors, people who are similar in age, people that you can talk to as you're going through each step to keep yourself going. Because even now I look at some of, you know, my, you know, former coworkers who've gotten out of the business, you know, and maybe they lacked one of these little pieces that, you know, that didn't keep them in it when things got tough. So, I mean, I think being an assistant coach is challenging because you're younger, you're around a lot of these older men. I think being a head coach is challenging because it's very lonely at the top. There's even less female head coaches to bounce ideas off of. And I try to be intentional in creating a couple that I can reach out to if I have something I need to talk to them about. And I think that the last challenge that I would really bring up is that I think, you know, is advocating for yourself and not being afraid to do that. I think as I've become older now, you know, I can reflect back on the mistakes that I made when I went through hiring processes or issues that came up within programs. I mean, I had my second child 2 weeks before my first season at Notre Dame. I never thought, and I remember years later talking to someone who said, well, did you ask for, you know, maybe for them to pay for a nanny to travel with you? And I said, oh no, I was just happy to be there. You know, I was just grateful for the job. And I think as women, we think that a lot, like, oh, I'm just so glad they gave me the job, instead of thinking about what do I need to be successful? And I can't be afraid to ask for that because a man is going to. So, you know, when I stepped away from coaching, actually, one of the first things I started to realize was how few female leaders we had in our profession. It was almost like I hadn't realized it before I stepped out. And then the first thing I thought of is I have to get back in. I have to be one of those female leaders. And I want to be a model to my two young girls of being a leader and somebody that others will look to make decisions, because I want them to do that for their life.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn us now to actually what it takes to administer Title IX and what that looks like for you all. So I'll just preface it by saying that Title IX is arguably the most important piece of gender equity related legislation to pass in the past 50 years, yet it's misunderstood and vilified. What myth or misconception about the law would you most like to correct, and or where does the law fall short, acknowledging that it is imperfect?
Well, first of all, what I would like to preface all of that with is my surprise, to be perfectly honest, to hear all of you younger women still feeling the way that you feel. When I started in this whole thing back in the 70s, we were saying these kinds of things, and it's amazing to me that here we are at 2022 and still saying women should be coaching women. And I mean, it's amazing to me. Anyway, it's very discouraging, actually. I haven't administered a program for a while, but reflecting on what I saw at the time, I would say one of the biggest issues was not just looking at numbers, but looking at, and so many of you have said this, is helping young women, helping to meet their needs and not just look at the numbers. Are we in compliance? That kind of thing. But I'm sure most of you have a lot more to say about it because you're in the midst of it. So that's all I'll say for now.
I think kind of touching off of Sherry's, it's interesting a lot of times, especially doing the finances for the department, you get asked a lot on comparing numbers to numbers or apples to apples. And it's not always something that's as easy as doing just that. I think knowing like one of the myths is schools must spend equally on men's and women's sports, dollars to dollars, but you can't always look at it in some of the things and how they might just appear. So I know like I look very closely when we do our equity and athletics reporting and financial reporting, and you might have one program, like for example, women's tennis, where you can have 8 scholarships and a men's program where you can have 4.5 scholarships. So you see maybe the differences that you're already going to have double an amount of scholarships that you can spend on one. So, or maybe roster sizes where you have a baseball team of 35 and a softball of 25. So when the numbers aren't exactly, sometimes it's hard in looking at numbers, but it's digging deeper into those and looking at the differences and what's actually taking place and making sure that as you're really evaluating what's taking place, where you really need to look at like, hey, where are the hotels you're staying at? Where are the different items that are being handed out? And just as you're really looking into those. I think one of the other myths that's interesting that I get sometimes on the male athletes is sometimes you get questions like, oh, are schools forced to cut men's programs, or has this affected a men's program in a certain way? And it's interesting to see some of the numbers that even since Title IX, men's opportunities have actually increased as well. But it isn't just, oh, a men's program might have been cut for these reasons. I think a lot of people might wonder if it was due to Title IX, instead of knowing that with some of the non-revenue sports, it's more interesting that, hey, we were kind of realigning some of these things to make these other opportunities in other areas, but it's not to decrease opportunities on certain men's sides, but it's more kind of how they realign the programs and adjust those. But I think there is a lot of wonder, especially from the men's side of that. Hey, was this affected due to Title IX or different areas? When that could be a myth that comes out of it. And one of those, as they look at administering some of the Title IX and the numbers in those areas.
Yeah, to kind of echo what Cami was talking about, I think most people, when they think of Title IX and equality, they think of the numbers. They think of how many scholarships you have, how many sports you have, how many athletes you have. And yes, that's all encompassed and it's important. But I think one of the biggest areas that people don't realize that Title IX does cover, because the way the law is written, it's archaic and it doesn't detail a lot of what's new today, is recognition in women's sports. And if we had the recognition, we would be able to increase, the funds and the budgets and the interests and everything that's needed to increase the opportunities for the women's sports. And it's the athletes too. I mean, they're putting in as much or more work than the men are. And they're not getting to see what they're doing, and they don't have those leaders out there that they're seeing that are in their same sports that they can look up to the same way that boys have. Because every, you know, commercial that you see, it's usually a male athlete. And, you know, the other day I saw the Buick commercial. I don't know if anyone saw that, with their new See Her Greatness campaign, where they're only playing the sound of these female accomplishments, because a lot of them aren't making it onto TV. That these women are amazing athletes and they're having huge accomplishments that no one even knows about. And that's not fair to them, that, you know, they don't have those leaders that they can see and look up to readily in the media. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that needs to change. And that Title IX actually does cover. The way the law is written and the statutes doesn't detail that. But if you go into, I teach 332 in the grad Kines program, so the sports law class. So if you take my class, you'll hear more about it. But if you go into the US Department of Education website, you can actually read all of the cases where they have gone in and investigated college programs, high school programs, even elementary school programs, and gone into what was not equitable. And it literally goes into, you know, how many social media posts and what modes of transportation were used, and, you know, the quality of their uniforms, where a lot of people, you just think the numbers. And I think they don't realize that recognition and the media exposure, it needs to be equal as well. And then what's tough is that the money is still what's driving everyone. And so those organizations like the NCAA that aren't bound by Title IX because they're not receiving federal aid, that, you know, they only have to make it equitable for PR purposes and to do the right thing, essentially. And so that's kind of what it took with, you know, March Madness, was for those female athletes to call them out, that essentially they're not in the wrong, you know, under federal law, but they're just not doing the right thing, and they're not promoting female sports like they should be. And so I think that's, you know, one of the biggest pieces that people don't understand, is all of that needs to change. And essentially once that changes, then I think there will be more funds, there will be more scholarships, and there will be more opportunity for women's sports.
Steph, before you go, I would say thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Sorry, I have to leave early.
Good.
Yeah, I'm echoing it too, and I think that's what the myth around the fact that adding female sports cut male sports is a crock. I'm just gonna say it right here. It's an afforded opportunity, and it's a right to be able to participate. And on top of that, what happened was it was a budgetary issue. People could not afford, programs could not afford to add sports and keep sports. And then what happened is they would drop a men's sport, but they bring a female sport in, and they devalue it, right? So you're cutting a men's sport, and then you're bringing in a female sport. You're not affording the same scholarships, the same travel, all of that. So I think that narrative needs to get out there, that it's the institution's choice to keep that male sport if they want to, and the money was not put into, and the support was not put into the guidelines and the legislation around Title IX to support participation. And then the other thing too is that I think with Title IX, gender equity did not mean full equity. And so, I mean, if we look around the room here, it really, really benefited white women. And so there's that piece too, where we're lumping together, not looking at the intersectionality of women. And so I think that we need to go further in this next, what are we on, the bicentennial of Title IX. We really need to look at intersectionality and see how it affects all women.
I think everyone touched on some really great points. I would just emphasize again, I think the big one that I've always heard is that you have to cut men's sports to create equality. And the other big one is just reverse discrimination that people, talk about in the hiring process, that, oh, they're only going to hire a woman and don't even go for that job. We've got word of that. So, I think that's the one that I hear in, my coaching circles. So I think, I think the challenge is, not just looking at dollars brought in if we're really trying to create equality, across the board, from salaries to investment in the budgets to all those pieces that, also, a lot of times you don't have those numbers. So as a women's coach, we don't know what's going on the men's side. We can just hope that it's being treated equally.
And that's why it matters who's administering, right? If you're putting your hopes in the hands of the administrators, right? As a coach, you hope that administrators are doing what they can. Okay, so I'm going to turn a last question for you all, and then we'll open up for Q&A. So this focuses on action and advice. So what can be done to increase the number of women working in intercollegiate or interscholastic athletic administration and coaching? And what advice do you have for all students interested in working in intercollegiate or interscholastic athletic administration or coaching?
Well, like I said, it's pretty discouraging hearing where you all are coming from at this point in time. And I mean, the encouragement that I always gave to coaches, to students, both undergraduate and graduate, was, be yourself and go for it. If it's something that, if this is what you want, then prepare yourself well for it, and then don't be intimidated. It's true. I mean, you are surrounded by a lot of males, and in many cases, they are extremely strong-willed, powerful, coming across as very powerful people, and you just can't be intimidated by that. You've got to stand up and you've got to say what's right. In terms of increasing numbers, I don't know. I think some of you have come up with some very good suggestions. I think one of the problems you all have brought up is life, is having families and having to balance all of these things and not necessarily having support to do it. I know that following some of the things that you've done, Claire, at St. Mary's with suggestions for providers for children and providers for people who were sick during this COVID time, I think all of that needs to really come to the forefront, is that people need support so that they can do a good job at what they need to do. And again, many of you probably have some other ideas. Obviously, where we all came from and thought we had good ideas of how to increase it didn't work. I do think, I don't know how, I do think that the NC2A is a definite problem in this whole situation. And I don't know that women are ready to go back to where we were, of having their own organizations and doing it. I think that that would in fact increase numbers tremendously. I really do. So.
Piper, you're on mute.
Sorry, don't know how that happened. Like I was saying earlier, I mean, I think really it's just doing what we're all doing right now, not being afraid to take opportunities and to be leaders in sports, and setting that example for younger females out there that are interested in doing the same thing. So Teresa brought up, applying for a position that you're like, I might never, get that position. I mean, why not just do it and, go out there and wow them and show them that you can do it too. So I think that's, probably the biggest one, is just doing, what we're doing, and, not being afraid to kind of push the envelope a little bit, and not, being okay with the status quo.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I women need to stick together. There's this other thing called the queen bee phenomenon, where women get in a position and they're in a masculine culture, and they want to be the one, you know, and instead of lifting up other women, you just want to hold that ground and be in that spot. And we need to stick together. They talk about us enough behind our backs, so we don't need to do that to each other. We need to lift each other up, and we need to continue to hire women. And when they're saying, I saw someone posting that there was zero women candidates at a position that's there for AD. And, you know, when something like that happens, you need to pound the pavement. They're there. And the reason why a lot of times there's more masculine or more male candidates for positions is because the males are running the show, and that's who they know. And they've put the word out on their message boards and everything. So we've got to make sure that we create those platforms to find really qualified females, because we're out there. And so I think we need to continue to do that. I like Sherry's idea. I mean, it's a dream world sometimes for me to think of, like, what if the switch was flipped, right? And women were running athletics, like really running athletics. Like, what would that look like? And I think it wouldn't be better, but it would be different. And I think a lot of those differences would really benefit our student athletes. And that's what's really important at the end of the day. So anyway, I'll stop there. I have a lot of ideas, but
I would like to add something to what Stephanie just said. And back to the AIAW, that was what the founding women said, was we want to do it different than the way the men have done it. And that hasn't happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to take some change and some risk, you know, because there will be female candidates who do not have the same experience as men do, but they have other things that give them experience and make them stronger for the position. So you have to look at those things instead of looking at, you know, do they fit X, Y, and Z criteria? And we have that good sense, you know, Piper mentioned that too. We have that instinct and good communication and good people skills, and being able to sort of identify that sixth sense about people. And we need to use that and hire women. That's all.
So yeah, I would add, you know, creating an intentional diverse candidate pool. You know, I think when I reflect back on, you know, applications that have come in when I'm hiring an assistant coach, like 90% of them are men. And I can't tell you how many of them never even coach, but they think they're qualified. And so I think, you know, pounding the pavement, like Stephanie said, there are women out there, and it's seeking them out if they don't apply for the job, and reaching out to your network for suggestions on people who might be out there. I think, you know, other advice to increase number of women would be to be a mentee and a mentor, right? Kind of take whatever avenue it takes to encourage women who are out there. Again, the whole queen bee thing, I was thinking the exact same thing. I remember my coach at Washington used to say, there's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. And I always thought that was the best quote. Because we do live in athletics, we're surrounded by men. And sometimes we feel like, oh, we're the special chosen female, instead of trying to bring more into that network. And then just the other piece that I would add is that I think finding, you know, sometimes people are chasing the next best job. And sometimes that next best job leads people to fall out of a career because it isn't the right fit. And I think being intentional and thinking about what is it professionally, what is it personally that you want? What are your goals? Do you want to potentially coach or work at the highest possible level? Or are you more interested in X, Y, Z? And so I think recognizing what drives you and having that self-awareness can be very important in terms of the longevity of your career.
Yeah, and I love this yikes patriarchy boo. But what I want to say on that too, and yeah, that was great, Coach. We also need to embrace men to understand what we're talking about. I think that's the piece too, is if we're all talking with each other, you know, and a lot of times we're preaching to the choir. So if we created some forums where men could understand where women are coming from and what the mission would be and the value that women bring to athletics, I think that is needed as well, because there are a lot of really good men out there who understand what we're talking about. So I think the more allies, if you'll call them, or co-conspirators that we have, the better.
Okay, thank you so much. I see we're going to open it up for Q&A. Go ahead and put questions if you have any in the chat. I see that Mirna, thank you so much, put a question in. So the question is, what should be the priorities for women's sports at St. Mary's? So Cami stepped away, but you know, the Sherry, Piper, and Stephanie, you know St. Mary's well enough, I think, to add in. So what should be the priorities for women's sports at St. Mary's?
I'll just say I want to give a shout out to Caitlin Laquette, who's on the call. She oversees women's rowing after I left St. Mary's, which is one of the sports I oversaw too. And she just got women's rowing their first media day ever. And getting them that recognition on social media is huge, because they've never gotten that before. And so many of our men's sports have had that for a really long time.
Fantastic.
And she's a grad Knies alum.
That's true. And a co-chair of Gales for DEI, yes, with Stacy.
I think also with any women's sports program, just to really engage and build some leadership skills, right, within those programs. So how can we build the next leaders in our women's sports programs as well? And then we'll have more candidates.
Do you have things that you're doing at San Francisco State related to building leadership that St. Mary's might learn from or replicate?
Yeah, we have a career day and we have leadership. We do it mostly with it based in community service. And then we have a philosophy that if the student athlete comes and wants to talk about a grievance or whatever it is, to have them take that and create something where they can lead and talk about it in community. So I try to just do that, but nothing directly. We work with student affairs and enrollment management to create leadership as well. So community service and then getting involved in the larger community of the university.
Thank you. Sherry or Teresa, do you want to jump in? Thoughts?
I would think Teresa would have more to say since she's right there involved right now.
What was the question again?
Yeah, what should be the priority for women's sports at St. Mary's?
The big question. I think the goal, I know for me is that Stephanie touched on it, is that, all the women who come from our program are better equipped to lead at the end of 4 or 5 years and to be successful in the world and to lead and take the skills that they've learned through our program and the adversity and the challenges and are set up for success. So I think that's more of like a microcosm of, the bigger athletic department. So, my goal is, success is defined by, success on the field, but also, what are we doing with the people that we're entrusted with in terms of setting them up to be happy, to deal with challenges that come their way. There's been a lot in the last 2 years that, we haven't dealt with before, right? And so managing all these different challenges and struggles that people have outside of just being on the field, I think it's really a new age with mental health. And I think our goal is to support and provide growth and leadership moments for these student athletes.
Thank you. Other questions at all? You can add to the chat or unmute if you want, either way. Okay. I think perhaps we covered everything, which is not actually possible, but maybe enough for today. So I just want to thank all of y'all for being here, particularly for our panelists, for providing your insights, and for everybody for joining us via Zoom. This is a good year for thinking about Title IX, right, and celebrating. I think we're going to see a lot of celebrations throughout the year. The specific anniversary is June 23rd, but also opportunities for some reflection and picking up perhaps some of the pieces that have not come to fruition, right? To Stephanie's point about women of color in particular, and the intersectionality that Title IX just doesn't cover, right? So trying to think about how we can improve in that area, among others. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate it very much, and we'll sign off for now.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
Sherry
My
and
pleasure.
Craig and Piper, it's nice to see you.
I know, good to see you.
It's like a little reunion. I loved it.
Thanks,
So
everyone.
awesome. And
Thank
and
you.
also Sharon. Sharon, you're